Hello, my last, or not my last video, but one of my last videos, the story of Travis Walton, which you can go and watch, uh, it got the most amount of views I've ever gotten, which is 5 views, and sort of pathetic, but hey, I just started and it's the best I can do. So in the spirit of alien stories, I've decided to give you another alien story, but this time on the guy who pretty much started it all. His name is Bob Lazar. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard his story because there's been documentaries, there's been interviews, news channels who go interview him, but this is more of his life story. What happened before that got him to the point of aliens, and why I think his story may be the only really credible one out there. So let's get right into it. So we start off in the 1980s, where, Bob was sort of this very ingenuitive guy. He liked to try out new things. He even put a plane engine inside his car that he'd take to work every day. So his coworkers would hear him come into work because it's a freaking plane engine. They're ridiculously loud, and he was put on the local newspaper. He was basically known for being a really ingenuitive guy. He liked doing things people didn't. And he was looking for a job, and, I'm not exactly sure of how he got the job, but all I know is that he was employed to work at something called S4, also known as Area 51, but Area 51 has got different sections, different bases, and S4 was the specific one he worked at, which supposedly had to deal with aircrafts, and he's not a pilot, he's not any of that. He would just be like an engineer of sorts. So he went on the job, and the first day of the job, well, first off, you have to fly there every single day to work, and you'd stay there for periods of time. You'd have to fly into work because it's a secret base. There's no car entry, there's nothing. It's a secret base. And during the job, he got all these weird reports, like things saying that spacecraft came from different star systems and all sorts of weird things. And he, thought it would be tests, so he committed them to memory just to see how well he thought. He didn't quite know if they were joking with him, but all he knew is that everyone around him was extremely formal, extremely strict, and there wasn't a lot of talking. Now, if you look at the Joe Rogan Experience, he actually interviews Bob Lazar. And in it, Bob was saying that all these scientists were split into different divisions. All right, of only 2 scientists. So it was him and a coworker, and then next door would be 2 other guys, so on, so on. It was just 2, 2, 2, 2. And these people weren't allowed to talk with each other. They were strictly monitored, only allowed to, talk with the person they're working with. And they would try and work on something, but they could never truly aspire to greater things because they couldn't work with other scientists. And if you're a scientist out there, you would know that to test a theory, you need many, many more scientists to try and figure it out for you. So there's that. Then on top of that, he went into this area, and it was like a hangar. And a hangar, if you don't know, is where they store airplanes. But in it, there were like these weirdly shaped aircraft, he would go on record saying. Aircraft that were like circular, square, all sorts of wacky shapes. And there were 5 or 6 of them. But he only got a good look at them for like a quick second, and that was it. And as the engineer, him and his buddy were told to reverse engineer one of these spacecrafts that they were assigned to do. So they looked at its power source, right, its core, sort of like an engine. And they were astounded because it wasn't like anything else they've ever seen before. It was weird. It was like a plasma type thing from his description, and they had no idea what it was, and they tested it, And his buddy who was working there had already started a few weeks before him, so he already got some testing done with this object. And they were just shocked because it didn't have like a fuel source like we do in cars or airplanes or boats, and it didn't have a propulsion system which airplanes need, and this looked like a spacecraft. And they later found out through testing that it was based on gravity. So what that means is that depending on how gravity is, it moves. And this thing was said to have anti-gravity, which did not exist. People said no. And basically what anti-gravity is it can bend gravity, which would then suggest that gravity comes in waves, which people didn't believe. They only believed that light came in waves, you know, like those charts you see where it goes like this. They only believed it was there. And so now they really don't know what to do, because they've found that it's anti-gravity, but that goes against all the laws of physics, because then that suggests that gravity has waves and it can be altered. But whenever they test it, it would work. So what that would basically mean is an anti-gravity vehicle that, depending on how this aircraft shifted the waves, it'd throw this aircraft at extremely quick speeds. And they just didn't know what to make of it. Now, eventually he gets to go in the aircraft, he gets to sit in it, and he says it's a very small aircraft. There's no obvious steering wheel, no obvious place to like sit. He described it almost as like a circular bench, and you just sat there. And he didn't really know how to fly it. Again, not a pilot. But he said even by pilot standard, it was different. Very, very different. And during these tests, these scientific discoveries, he'd sometimes think other people are going through breakthroughs because suddenly the officials would be there and investigate. But he didn't really know. And eventually on this journey, the test dates are scheduled where they would actually take these objects and fly them. And he said they'd make really erratic movements. Like they'd be going straight, then suddenly flip on the dime, you know, and by today's standards, we don't have anything like that, which could suggest that this is something way different, you know, and not necessarily alien, but maybe a new type of technology the government's developing for warfare. I don't really know. But suddenly he was pulled out. And at the time, he didn't know why he was pulled from the project. He felt he had done his part, he had done well, and they were actually making some progress. He was finally starting to reverse engineer, figure out certain aspects of this ship. And he later found out, years later, that the government, since he was doing a government job at a top secret base, was tracking everything in his life. All his phone calls, his wife, everything. And the reason why he eventually found out they pulled him out was because his wife, since he was out late, he'd be gone for long periods of time and he wouldn't be able to communicate with her. She thought that he was cheating. So she went out and started cheating on him and, you know, not really staying committed to the relationship, but he didn't know. So they feared that this could anticipate an outbreak, meaning anger, meaning they tell her about the project, so they just kicked him. But he already had all the dates for the schedule and like test dates for when they're flying these things. And so day by day, whenever these would happen, he eventually started bringing friends to go and see these test flights. And on one day, he was caught. He described it as complete darkness, and then all of a sudden a green light, and they're surrounded by guards. And the guards take him in. They somehow let him loose. They're like, you know, this was supposed to be a secret. But what they didn't know was he had a camera and he had actually filmed it. So he's got a film of this thing going like zippity zappity, okay? And he doesn't know how to explain it. He thinks it's a spaceship, and the government's not letting in on any secrets. And so he goes on to tell his friends about it, to tell people he trusts, and one of them suggests that he should bring it to the news. And so he says okay on several occasions, but backs off. And the time that he actually went to do it, he actually fought to try and get it out because he didn't want to release it. He thought this is like a social suicide. First I'm talking about aliens, then the government's in on this, they're going to end my life. But what it actually did was it made him so public, so famous, that it started this whole alien phenomenon thing. And then he knew he was essentially untouchable. But what the government knew that, they also knew that the people he loved most weren't. And he said immediately after he said that, he got a phone call that essentially was threatening. Some general or something was like, look what you've done, we're gonna come get you. And he already had guards looking at him. He'd have people walking and tracking his movements. But now the IRS was getting involved and basically ruining the lives of anyone who got involved in it, except him because, well, he's public. He could have more secrets to release. And the government, he said, supposedly went on to destroy his reputation. They erased all his school records. They erased all his, records saying he worked there, all his engineering records. They basically said those don't exist. But then you look at the knowledge that Bob has attained, and it's not plausible to say that he wasn't educated. And even in old school records that were manually written, so they can't digitally erase them, his colleagues found his name there, his attendance and everything. And on one occasion, Bob even described the type of handprint screening, because they had this screening thing where like it had your hand and it would x-ray it and measure the bone length. And he described that, which was not tech at the time, but only the government had it. And government officials said, yes, we have this. And recently, gravitational waves were discovered. They figured out, yes, these things exist. But then it begs the question, well, how did he figure it out 20 years before anyone else did? Right? And so you go on to more tinier facts, right? And some interesting facts are, one, he said that they found it at an archaeological dig. I don't know if you know what that means, but that means these things are ancient, which essentially suggests that these spacecraft, these 6 spacecraft that he was dealing with, were thousands of years old. And then it also adds another question, well, how did such a huge archaeological find stay, unnoticed? Then there's another fact that he said one of them had a hole in it, as if it had been shot down. So were they fighting? We don't know, but we don't know. I don't know how else to describe it. We don't know what he saw, and all records were erased. All people who were affiliated with him, all his colleagues, who he claims would have spoken out had the government not basically ruined his life, didn't. And now we got his word. But here's my thing. My thing is, if he's credible, okay, if he's credible, I think it would mean the fact that his story has not changed. For the past 20 plus years, 30 plus years, it has been the same, and it doesn't make sense for a guy, like I said into the Travis Walton story, to sacrifice his whole life to this story if it wasn't true. Now, who knows? He may be the world's best liar. We don't know. But it's the fact that over the years, these small pieces of evidence that suggest that he actually did work there are coming out. And now they're getting more interviews with people who are now feeling more comfortable with this idea to speak out. And I think it's just astounding. Like, if this is true, it's going to be the most insane revelation ever. But if it's also true, then there's also that dangerous aspect. Like, why is the military keeping it secret? Why is the government doing this, you know? Could it be used for a potentially disastrous weapon? Or is there something we truly don't know? Or is Bob Lazar lying? We'll never know. But as of right now, I think the only compelling thing is that the government has not shown any pictures of the space or anything. No one knows about it really. And if you look at the mountains surrounding, it's literally the only structure there for miles. That's sort of a brief summary of the story of Bob Lazar. I do hope you enjoyed it. It took a while to research it. Go check out the Joe Rogan Experience because it's pretty cool, and that's where I found this video. I hope you had a good time. Click the like button and subscribe, please. Until next time.